Good evening. You are watching the news from the Sultanate of Oman television. First, the headlines. By royal directives of His Majesty the Sultan, the Sultanate sends relief flights to Lebanon due to the catastrophic explosion in Beirut port. The COVID-19 Supreme Committee decides to lift the lockdown between the governorates while the governorate of Dhofar is still under lockdown. The Public Authority for Civil Aviation issues the second alert on the weather condition over the Arabian Sea, indicating reduction of the severity of the expected tropical condition. And 10 COVID-19 deaths are recorded and 354 new cases have been registered. Those were the headlines. Now for the news in detail. By royal directives of His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq, the Sultanate of Oman sent relief flights to Lebanon due to the catastrophic and misfortunate explosion in Beirut port. The first Omani relief flight reached the Lebanese capital today. The relief, which includes 22 tons of various medical and humanitarian essentials, was transported by military aircraft from Royal Air Force of Oman. Oman will continue to send relief flights to Lebanon over the next days in solidarity with the people of Lebanon and to address the aftermath of the Beirut port explosion. The Supreme Committee dealing with COVID-19 developments, headed by His Excellency Sayyid Ahmed bin Faisal al-Busaidi, Minister of Interior, reviewed forecast reports on the weather condition in the Arabian Sea and decided to bring forward the close-down uplifting schedule. The lockdown between the governorates is lifted from 2 p.m. today, Friday, August the 7th, 2020. The Supreme Committee stressed that the decision does not include the governorate of Dhofar, which will remain closed until further notice. The committee also stressed that the night curfew in all the governorates will continue from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. until Saturday, August 8, 2020, and from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. until Saturday, August 15, 2020. The Public Authority for Civil Aviation issued a second alert on the weather condition over the Arabian Sea. The latest weather charts and analysis indicates the reduction of the severity of the expected weather condition and amount of rain associated with it. The associated rain will take effect from Saturday morning to Sunday evening over the governorates of Muscat, South and North Sharqiyya, Al-Dakhiliyya and South Al-Batina, with chances of rain ranging between 20 and 50 millimeters during 24 hours period, associated with gusty winds, flash floods, and reduction of horizontal visibility. Sea state along most of the coast is expected to be rough with a maximum wave height between 3 and 5 meters. The Public Authority for Civil Aviation advises the public to take precautions during the rain and not to cross overflowing wadi and check the sea state before sailing and to follow the latest weather bulletins. The National Committee for Emergency Management stressed the complete readiness of all the sectors and institutions to deal with the tropical situation that is expected to affect the country. Electricity emergency response plans have been activated in all the governorates, and the technical and maintenance teams have been prepared to deal with any emergency. The water levels in distribution sub-tanks and strategic tanks were raised to ensure the availability of water to consumers. Fuel distribution companies were instructed to support fuel stations in the wilayas and governorates to ensure the availability of fuel in the stations. Companies operating on road construction were ordered to make available equipment necessary for maintaining the affected roads. Waste management companies operating in all the governorates were instructed to take precautionary measures to offload containers to avoid the accumulation of waste. The Royal Oman Police stressed its preparedness to deal with the weather condition over the Arabian Sea through putting up distribution plans in all the expected areas to be affected. It's prepared to provide support and aid as well as to monitor the roads and to deal with all the emergency cases if necessary. The operations management in the police commands in all the governorates are fulfilling their role to receive any information and to coordinate with the government and private bodies to bring back the main services in case they are affected by the weather condition. The Ministry of Health announced 10 deaths of COVID-19 patients, which brings the total number of COVID-19 fatalities in the Sultanate to 502. The ministry also announced 354 new confirmed cases of COVID-19, which brings the total number registered in the Sultanate to 81,067. The Ministry of Health stresses that 72,263 cases have been recovered. In the last 2 weeks and on a daily basis during the evening hours, many people were rushing home to beat the nationwide restriction of movement that started on 7 p.m. on Saturday, 25th of July 2020. More details in the following report by Abdullah bin Ahmed al-Rubai.
Hundreds of people in the governorate of Muscat are seen rushing home on a daily basis during evening hours to beat the nationwide restrictions of movement that kicked off at 7 p.m. on Saturday, 25th of July 2020, which is set up to be rescheduled from tomorrow 8th to be from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Heavy downpour of a large number of people walking back home, others paddling their bicycle either in pairs or individual, while residents of various wilayats commute by buses or taxis, and many of the motorists drove their way to their houses in their wilayats.
We are committed to the precautionary measures that has been taken before the lockdown, during the lockdown, and the measures will be continuing after the lockdown as well. It is stressful, but it is useful to keep all of us alive.
I am Nia. Being at home brought me more happiness and joy with my parents and siblings. I had my Eid prayer, wore new clothes and had delicious recipes. I spent my Eid al-Adha very fruitfully. I respect the nation's decision to avoid gatherings as it is highly required to protect us all from the COVID-19.
A nationwide dusk to dawn is intended to encourage social distancing to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. In the last 2 weeks, the country's streets and many highways were empty from 7 p.m. and all commercial activities in small and major centers were totally closed across the Sultanate. It's from 6 p.m., the time people hurrying home from the places of their work. Motorists who failed to beat the deadline time on the restriction of movement are stopped by police as roadblocks have been set up at specific areas. As it can be seen here, everyone is rushing back home with their cars, and that's the benefit of the lockdown. Everyone is committed to be back home before 7 p.m. Abdullah bin Ahmed al-Rubai, Sultanate of Oman Television, Al-Qurm, Muscat.
The Directorate General of Disease Surveillance and Control released the details of the epidemiological status of COVID-19 in the Sultanate. Here's another report by Abdullah bin Ahmed al-Rubai.
The epidemiological situation of COVID-19 in the Sultanate till the end of July 2020. More than 18 million COVID-19 cases and about 700,000 deaths have been registered worldwide. continents of America and Europe are on the top list of the infected cases and deaths. The Emergency Committee on COVID-19 has announced in its fourth meeting on 31st of July 2020 that the outbreak still constitutes a public health emergency of international concern and stressed the anticipated lengthy duration of this COVID-19 pandemic. The committee has also confirmed the importance of sustained national and global response efforts. The first COVID-19 cases that have been registered in the Sultanate are for two Omani female citizens coming from Iran. Registering other cases across the Sultanate has continued, with the confirmed cases reached 8,286, with a 77.6% recovery rate till August 5th. The total number of tests has reached 308,333 tests since the beginning of the pandemic. The case definition has gone through several phases based on the epidemiological situation. At first, the case definition was related to traveling to endemic countries, but after the spread of the pandemic in the community, the definition was changed to be more effective to recognize the infected cases in the Sultanate and the demographic distribution and spread of the pandemic. Information and epidemiological and clinical characteristics related to the pandemic have been studied and analyzed. It also has been identified the risk and spread factors in the Sultanate during the past 6 months, which showed the admission rates were accurate indicators to monitor the disease. The last update of COVID-19 definition in the Sultanate was issued on July 25, 2020 to keep pace with the global and local epidemiological situation, in which all severe pneumonia cases will be subject to lab tests except the mild cases. Maintaining the precautionary measures and infection control is necessary for the suspected and confirmed cases and contacts with the clinical follow-up for all cases. All the lab tests are available in the Central Public Health Laboratories as well as in all referral hospitals. The Minister of Health is working on introducing referral public health laboratories in North Al-Batina at Dakhiliya Governorates in order to enhance the diagnosis capacities for the public health emergency. To monitor the epidemiological situation of COVID-19 pandemic in the Sultanate, the following indicators will be adopted for the event of emerging another wave of the pandemic in the upcoming phases. The number of cases admitted in the hospitals in general and in the ICUs in particular. Sentinel sites across the Sultanate, using the results of the National Serological Survey of COVID-19, using the number of daily deaths per million inhabitants and comparing to mortality rates in recent years. The latest epidemiological data refers to signs of decreasing in the total number of infected cases and the cases admitted in the hospitals and ICUs.
Lebanon's president said today an investigation into the biggest blast in Beirut's history would examine whether it was caused by a bomb or other external interference as residents tried to rebuild their shattered lives after the explosion. The search for those missing has intensified as rescuers sifted rubble in a race to find anyone still alive after Tuesday's blast that killed 154, smashed up the city, and sent seismic shockwaves around the region. Michel Aoun said that there is a possibility of external interference through a rocket or a bomb or any other act. He said it would also consider whether the explosion was due to negligence or an accident. He previously said highly explosive material had been stored in unsafe conditions for years at the port. The state news agency NNA said that 16 people were taken into custody. UN organizations are stepping up efforts to help Beirut's population after a chemical explosion, expressing concerns about food shortages, a lack of COVID-19 protective gear, and tens of thousands of homeless children. At a UN briefing in Geneva today, World Health Organization spokesman Christian Lindemir said that the organization was appealing for $15 million for emergency trauma and humanitarian health support. He said that 17 containers laden with personal protective equipment, much needed for fighting the coronavirus outbreak, were destroyed in the blast. World Food Programme spokeswoman Elizabeth Byers said that the agency is allocating 5,000 food parcels to families in Beirut, noting that Lebanon imports 85% of its food, much of it through the now damaged Beirut port. Saudi Arabia has sent 2 planes to Lebanon carrying more than 120 tons of medicine, medical devices, emergency supplies, tents, shelter kits, and food items. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S.-Iran envoy Brian Hook is leaving his post, and U.S.-Venezuela envoy Elliot Abrams will add Iran to his role following a transition period with Hook. Hook's departure comes as the United Nations Security Council prepares to vote next week on a U.S. bid to extend an international arms embargo on Iran. Some diplomats have said the measures lack support. If the United States is unsuccessful in extending the arms embargo on Iran, it has threatened to trigger a return of all the UN sanctions under a process known as snapback agreed in 2015 nuclear deal between Tehran and world powers. Russia is about to be the first country to approve a COVID-19 vaccine with mass vaccination planned as early as October, using shots that are yet to complete clinical trials. But scientists worldwide are sounding the alarm that the headlong rush could backfire and point to ethical issues that undermine confidence in the Russian studies. The experimental COVID-19 shots began first in human testing on a few dozen people less than 2 months ago, and there is no published scientific evidence yet backing Russia's late entry to the global vaccine race, much less explaining why it should be considered a front-runner. As India hits another grim milestone in the coronavirus pandemic today, crossing 2 million confirmed cases and more than 41,000 deaths, community health volunteers went on strike, complaining they were ill-equipped to respond to the wave of infections in rural areas. Even as India has maintained comparative low mortality rates, the disease has spread widely across the country, with the burden shifting in recent weeks from city to rural areas, where the resources are scarce or non-existent. Around 900,000 members in all-female community health force began a 2-day strike today, protesting they are being robbed into help with contact tracing, personal hygiene drives, and in quarantine centers, but weren't given personal protective equipment or any additional pay. This is the Sultanate of Oman television. Before we end tonight's news bulletin, here are the main points once again. By royal directives of His Majesty the Sultan, the Sultanate sends relief flights to Lebanon due to the catastrophic explosion in Beirut port. The COVID-19 Supreme Committee decides to lift the lockdown between the governorates, while the governorate of Dhofar is still under lockdown. The Public Authority for Civil Aviation issues the second alert on the weather condition over the Arabian Sea, indicating reduction of the severity of the expected tropical condition. And 10 COVID-19 deaths are recorded and 354 new cases have been registered. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news bulletin. From all of us here at the newsroom and the studios, thank you for watching and have a good night.